All right, my name is Rich Schmidt. I'm here with Mike Andersen. We're at Cafe Du Barry in Portland. It's January 8th, 2021. Mike, thanks so much for joining us today. First question, we're going to change it up a little bit. Why food? Why restaurants?
Well, when I grew up, I had a very loving life of every day was like perfect. And when I finally moved away from home at the age of like 20, I mean, it was wonderful. Everyone wants to get out of their house, you know, where they grew up. And I noticed after a while there was something missing. And I just, you know, it took me about a year to figure out it was the food that my mother made. So it took me a while, but I just got back into it because it made me feel good, you know, to cook for myself like I had done and she had done for me, but I didn't realize that that was happening, you know, during my, you know, 0 to like 19 or 20 years, right?
So once you realized it, what did you do?
I started, and I had always cooked for myself or other people, but I just wasn't realizing that that's what I was doing. Mm-hmm. And so then I kind of like started cooking Chinese food, and I did it for my own health because I realized that, you know, cooking homegrown food was, you know, important. Mm-hmm. And it immediately, you know, made me feel good. Mm-hmm. And from there it went to, you know, serving your friends and, you know, all your, you know, when you're only 20 years old, you have a lot of people hanging on with you and you're hanging on with them and you're, you know, having, you know, fun parties and, you know, it was about the food and, you know, relationships and just being with, you know, each other. So I was trying to actually make my childhood go further.
What did you need to learn? What did you already know about cooking, and what did you need to learn about cooking?
Well, I had no, you know, formal things other than what my mother had cooked for me, and I was born on a farm, and we had cows, horses, sheep, chickens, and you know, and pastures, and you know, trees and gardens, and I mean the garden was, you know, huge. And then I had berry fields surrounding my property. You know, so I would, like, as I grow older, and we actually had a 100-year-old orchard in my front yard because it used to be a century farm. It was a century farm. It is now. But when my parents purchased it, we had this, you know, orchard, and then next door there were, you know, berry fields. So as I grew up, I learned to, like, you know, take care of the garden because that's what your mother makes you do. And then I go, and my neighbors, you know, everyone hires the kids next door to do. So I, you know, do the hay, you know, I put up the berries. I go do, you know, filbert orchards, you know, run tractors. And it was awesome. Yeah. And fish. I go fishing out my, you know, I'd walk like, you know, a football field, and I could fish in a creek. You know, I'd walk a couple football fields and I could fish in a pond. It was fantastic, you know. You know, catch, you know, bullfrogs, and, you know, my mother, you know, cooked them for me a couple times, and after that I cooked them myself. But I don't remember cooking until I thought back on it, you know, that I actually was doing that. So that's kind of how I got into the cooking thing.
So with no formalized training, then how did you learn new styles or new types of cuisine?
Well, I met a person who taught me about. He was a French chef, and he showed me how, and it was no formal training. It wasn't in a restaurant. He just showed me how to make a soup, how to make a pastry, how to make a sauce, few dishes, and he kind of like pushed the door open for me, and then I just went with it. You know, took me over. So like I said, then it led to like Chinese cooking, and I used to do Chinese banquets and make everything from scratch. And then he got me a job in a Japanese restaurant. It was called Busch Garden, and it had been around since like the early 60s. And then he says, you know, there's no French restaurant in this city, but Japanese is as close as you can get to the, you know, the feeling of, you know, really good cooking. So I worked there. I worked in Japanese restaurants for probably 5 or 6 years. Yeah.
What were your biggest sort of takeaways from that time and working in restaurant?
I loved it. But, you know, and I'd always worked like 2 jobs my whole life. But, you know, I'd go work and I'd work for, you know, 18, 19 hours a day. And I loved it. I could hardly wait to wake up and get back into the door. You know, even though it wasn't my own place, I still had the passion for it, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And as you were sort of embarking on a career in food preparation and in cooking, were there any things you learned there? Were there any kind of lessons you took from there and that you brought with you to the next step?
What kind of got me interested overall was, you know, everyone wants to know the secret of life and, you know, how to get ahead without working for it. But my mentor told me, he says, you know, if you want to learn about life in a hurry, just go to work in a restaurant. It kind of will like show you something, you know, like magnified. And that, it really, you know, I took hold of that. And I actually believed, you know, not even having any, I didn't even wash dishes in a restaurant till I was like 23 years old. I left a good job and I went and I started in a restaurant and I washed dishes. And I left a good job, so, but it's still like I loved it, right? Yeah.
So you talk about like the kind of the accelerated magnifying prospect of working in a restaurant and learning lessons. So were there any particular moments that stand out to you, any stories from early days or lessons you learned, either the good way or the hard way?
Well, I mean, I had a family, my wife and my children. You know, I had like, I married into like 4 kids, right? And my wife said, well, we should have a restaurant of our own, other than working in one. And I said, okay, I don't know how to do one, but we did it. She says, at least we can eat and we won't starve. So that's kind of how that happened, you know. And then, you know, you just never give up. And it just, you know, it's like everything in life, everything is not easy. But, you know, I loved cooking and I loved my family, and I was going to persevere. Yeah, never gave up.
So tell me about starting this place, about what kind of food and location and all of that and getting started.
Well, I was trained in French cooking and also, you know, Japanese. And, you know, I had, you know, a lot of Oriental cooking in my background just from my own interest. And so then I bought, my wife and I purchased a Café du Berry, and he was a Frenchman who lived in a province in France called Berry. And so I bought his restaurant and his legacy, which was, you know, not very long as far as, you know, this restaurant being here, but, you know, I just kind of like dove into the waters of a French restaurant, and that's what I was interested in.
As you got started, what were the biggest challenges once you took over?
The biggest challenges was not knowing what's ahead of you when you wake up in the morning. I mean, you know, since I was not raised in a restaurant, I had no idea what's going on. I did not know like how to like manage my money as far as in a restaurant goes. All I know is that I had, my wife behind me, and I still have a daughter that's cooking here. She started the restaurant with me, 38 years ago. And all I know is that they supported what we were doing because this was their farm. This was our, our house. And we all like worked together to make it happen. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And we are still doing that. Very, very rewarding.
So at what point does wine start to play a role in your life?
Well, of course, when I opened the restaurant, it was 1984, and maybe after a couple of years, and I beginning to see some people come through that were very interested in wine, just not the people selling wine, but people who, enjoyed wine, and most of it was the Oregon wine. So it was back in like the middle 80s, and I was put in front of all of these wonderful Oregon wines that I probably did not appreciate, what it was until, as time went on.
So I'm curious your first impressions of Oregon wine then, if you can remember, or of the people involved.
Well, I think it was more of people that were connoisseurs of wine, not the people selling me the wine. Mm-hmm. They were the one that got me interested. And of course, all of the, the people who imported wine, since I'm a French restaurant, they, were, very interested in more of, European wines. But I was very much, enthralled with and input with like the best wine in the world. Mm-hmm. And as time went on, I just got more interested in the Oregon wine because, maybe I'm a slow learner. So, but anything that's done well, in this world is worth trying, so we have to give kudos to the whole world as, being a part of it. But, as of in this last 10 years, I have never appreciated anything more than what we have, at our doorstep here.
So tell me about when in 1984, when you take over, what does the restaurant menu, everything look like, and how has it evolved since?
Well, when I bought the restaurant, I did not take anything from the previous owner's menu because it was not my menu. And I'm not French, right? So even though I liked everything he did, I had to do my own food. And I haven't changed anything since that day. I just tried to make it better, right? Yeah, so I'm kind of a stick in the mud.
Seems to be working for you so far.
Well, I always refer to my mentor, but he says, never be a novelty. It's just stick with, what you got, and, almost, going close to 40 years now, I can see what he's talking about.
So once you got sort of developed an interest in wine, how did you integrate it into what you were already doing?
Well, always your wine representatives would try to get you involved in it. And the wine industry had changed so much when I started that basically there weren't not a lot of Oregon representation, because they weren't being recognized by, you know, the wholesalers. And so I kind of like went, you know, I was like more into like selling the European wines, and then as time went on, I realized that it's kind of a dead end. You know, something was missing. And within the last, like, you know, 5 or 6 years, I started to realize, you know, the wines here in Oregon are some of the best in the world. And I was, you know, naive, I guess, to that, right? But now that I have rediscovered, you know, essentials, I am just like been turned around, and, you know, I am just, and of course, you know, I'm a native, you know, Oregonian, and I, you know, love to represent, you know, our state, and it's been very satisfying, self-satisfying to do that. So it's almost been like I'm rejuvenated in life.
So with wines for your menu, how do you sort of choose things that fit with your food, and how do you sort of envision them as pairings?
Well, I basically do not actually care about pairing a wine. In my own belief, I would just like to go to a restaurant. It doesn't have to be, of course, my restaurant, and I would look at the wine menu. I says, I want to drink a red wine, or I want to drink a white wine. What do I feel like? I don't care what food I'm eating. I don't really think that's important. I think, you know, you have to treat them both equally. You know, what you want to eat and what you want to drink. So yeah, I've always felt that way. But I definitely know how to pair food and wine. But that's not, I think people these days care more about, you know, each one being separate. Yeah.
So then what do you look for a wine on your wine list?
I look for a representative that can show me the right direction, right? Because I am not a wine expert. I think I have good taste. I have drank a lot of finest wines in the world, but I do, you know, it's all about representation of a vineyard in an area. And in, you know, recent, you know, years, I've gotten to know some people from, you know, families that own vineyards, and, you know, they're just like a restaurant. They're all a bunch of families, you know, and children and grandchildren and parents that represent it. It's like makes me feel like, oh, they're doing the same thing I've been doing, right?
So tell me about the growth of the business then. You haven't changed a whole lot in terms of menu, but what has changed in the years you've been here, and how have you sort of grown and thrived?
Well, restaurant business is very difficult in a way of like every moment's a new challenge. It's like, you know, customers are always changing, and of course you have a lot of repeat customers, but I mean, it's like if you were an artist and you were to make a sculpture for every customer that came in, and that was their food, that is what you do, right? And, you know, if you're an artist, you always want to be the best at it. And so as you go through this period of like being, you know, in a restaurant and a business for so long, you know, you have a passion to continue. And what has actually sustained my last few years is the Oregon wine has really captured me. And, you know, I'm so happy it happened, because it was a part that was missing. Yeah, because I was just so busy in what I was doing, I didn't realize, you know, there was some missing parts there. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So Oregon wine in particular, is there something, what's special to you about Oregon wine?
Pardon me?
Sorry. What is special to you about Oregon wine?
The passion of the people who make it. Their love and their care is the same as what I'm trying to do. Mm-hmm. And until I met those people, and I never had time to do that because I was so much, you know, in my place, in my restaurant, I could never get out into the field and actually see what was going on. Mm-hmm. And when I did, I realized they were just like me, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So we saw an interesting story about you and the Trailblazers over the years. I'm curious about the relationships with the team and how that got started.
Well, that started in the late '80s, and all the way, you know, till probably 15 years ago. I mean, we're still associated with them, but you know, it was more players from like the 90s, you know, like Clyde Drexler and Terry Porter, and I mean, I had so many famous people through this place, and I, you know, followed, you know, basketball my whole life, you know. I mean, they were so passionate. It was almost like Cafe du Barry was their home. Mm-hmm. I would have teams come here from other states, the whole team, the whole plane. There'd be like 45 of them. And they would like make a reservation like 3 weeks ahead and pre-plan their menu. And they'd come in, you know, and because they all were like, they're a team as like if you were a staff in my restaurant, we're all, you know, mm-hmm. and they all know each other in the whole league, right? And you know, so I get people from every team, you know. It was very special, yeah, and they just loved us because we were comfort to them, you know. Someone would recommend them, you know. And probably, you know, the most influential basketball person of all time was Bill Russell. And he was a very good customer. He's up in his age and is like, you know, he's over in his like middle, late 80s, and he can't get around, but he was the most, mm-hmm. and he was like a god to me when I was a kid. I mean, you know. I read his books, I did everything, and I had a lot of special players here, but they made us feel like family. Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah, we welcomed their love. Mm-hmm.
Do you know how it got started? Do you know how they found you in the first place?
Well, it got started with the Trailblazer doctor, Bob Cook, and he started the Trailblazer doctor probably 1969. And actually, I used to go to the Trailblazers games because I used to work at the Memorial Coliseum. So I would see all the Trailblazers in the beginning, from the game one, all the way. And so Dr. Cook, he was the doctor of the team, mm-hmm. and so he would bring all of his, you know, his friends here, which were all players, and he'd say, "Here, try Cafe du Barry," right? And he promoted my place, right? It was very good. It's amazing how much love goes through. You know, it's like you're going on a camping trip, 365 days a year.
So I'm curious with especially like Bill Russell, and it's someone who you looked up to so much as a child. It has to be a little intimidating making him food when he comes into your restaurant.
Oh, you know what? And I didn't even know it was him until I heard his laugh from the dining room. He's a very, you know, he's been around since the 50s, and I heard him laugh, and he was with my friend Clyde Drexler, but Clyde never introduced him to me. You know, and I was busy, and I hear this laugh coming out of the dining room. I'm going, I know that laugh. And oh my gosh, yes, it was like, I mean, he's a legend in the world, just not in basketball, but just in, you know, diplomacy and, you know, equality in life. You know, yes. It was a great person to meet.
As you sort of look back on time here, are there other sort of stories like that or connections you've made here that stand out in your mind? People you've met through this or been able to help through this that stand out to you?
I would say it would be more like my regular customers. I've had people here come in here for like 38 years. I have, you know, people who were engaged here. I have people who then they had their kids, and then those kids got married, and then those kids have kids, you know, children, and they still eat here. You know, and it's kind of carried over with family traditions.
So obviously, coming off of 2020, a rough year for everyone, especially restaurants. So tell me about last spring, COVID coming out. What was your initial reaction, and what were the changes you had to make to keep things going?
Well, initial reaction was I was very devastated, of course, and I had already gone through so many hardships in my restaurant. I mean, I went through you know, there was the Black Friday of the, you know, market, or the 1986 stock market, and then you know, many economy was not good. And then 9/11, right? I mean, that was I went down to the bottom again. I mean, everyone did, right? But we just managed to hang in there. And then there was the housing market in, you know, 2008-9. I mean, then the rug was pulled out of, you know, everyone again. Just not me, everyone. So finally, you know, when this happened, the COVID, I told my son, I says, you know what? I don't know if I can do this anymore. I know we can make it, but I don't know if I have the energy to do it. I don't know if I want to do this again. And so he said, I'll do it. I said, okay, do it. So he kind of he took over what I had already been doing, and, you know, he now works the hours I did, you know, for 35 years.
You had talked earlier about it being a family business, so I'm curious about what point did your family start in with it, and with that kind of handoff, how did that sort of transition go for you?
Well, it was more like a family business. Is of course, all, you know, my children and stuff, you know, all had a part in this business, but I also have a lineage of other people who had worked here in families. I've had my Vietnamese friends I've known since the early 90s. They all worked with me here, and it's still going on today. And the same as Peruvian. I had the same type of family thing going on. So I've always had, it's been a family not blood, but like friendship, and we need each other, and we're going to support each other, and if someone can't come to work, they'll call their cousin, right? Just like me, some of my kids couldn't come, they would find they would find one of their brothers or sisters to come to work. So the family and just the unity is like very important. I couldn't have made it that far without them. I mean, personally, you can't do this by yourself.
So then after the sort of the transition last year where your son taking over some of that, what were the changes that were implemented to keep Cafe Du Barry going during the pandemic?
It really wasn't any different than starting a restaurant. You just had to keep the continuity of what you've done. Just keep pushing forward and it will come out. And we've had to do a few things, but it's more like just unity and hope, and it'll all work out.
So now, one of the things you did with like food to go was also sort of a wine to go, or kind of a wine marketplace. How did how that came about?
Well, the food to go was you had to do it, and we were never exactly focused into food to go. It was more like we're hands-on here, and it increased significantly the food to go, and then I realized that we need to sell Oregon product and combine the feelings of our local people, because we all wanted to be comforted during the COVID. I mean, nothing more comforting than to drink and eat local food. So at that point, I tried to, with help, invite more local wines, and then I started visiting all the vineyards and meeting the people, and I realized that we're a big family, and now they are supporting me as much as I've been supporting them. But that was kind of a transition thing, and I didn't realize until COVID.
So now that the roles have changed a little bit for you, tell me about the future for Cafe Du Barry. What comes next here?
Well, we just keep going forward with our traditional, what we've been trying to do, and like I say, my family, my son and my daughter work here, my grandson. And I also have another son who's an executive chef in Colorado. And we just try to keep staying positive. And we don't plan to change anything other than striving to go forward. I mean, we're going from an old man here, and they all have children, right? So they want their lineage to go on. They want to make sure that their family's taken care of, and we just try to stick together. And
what about for you personally? What's in your future?
I will work as long as I can because I enjoy it. Physically you start to break down a little bit. The hands and stuff can't hold on to stuff as well, but I'm as much interested as I was 45 years ago as I am now.
and beyond the work, I know you mentioned being able to get into wine country now a little bit, being able to enjoy wine as a consumer a bit. What are your plans with that going forward?
I'm just going to let it lead me to where I'm going. But now that I live in wine country, it's so accessible, and I always, want to get closer to it. Because in my whole career here, being in my restaurant, I was never able to get out into it. And that has been, a new avenue for me. I mean, that's why I appreciate life more now, is, in this industry, because of the relationship between the vineyards and the restaurants, and the local foods. And the weather.
So as you look ahead for Oregon wine as an industry, what do you kind of foresee as you look ahead? What are you hoping for, and is there anything that you're afraid of?
I'm afraid of nothing for it. I support it more and more every day, and I'm not just saying that. I really do feel it. I think it is going to lead our state into a recognition of solidarity as far as being, a state, like we've always been, and in this industry here, I mean, it can't be more important than that. So I fully support it, and I will always support it.
With the relationship between wines and restaurants and how you've seen that grown and how it's grown for you, how do you foresee Oregon wine, local foods, local wines, and Oregon restaurants growing?
Well, I think they're all in equal portions there. You can have wine, and you can have, local food, and you can have a restaurant. But if you don't put them all together, it doesn't do a lot. You have to combine. I mean, everyone in this day and age are concerned about, what goes on next door, not what goes on in another country. And like I'm saying, until, as life goes on in my world, I realize how, close we are to being together as a community. And that we should share it, and it really has a lot to do with our spirit, our local spirit.
All right. That's all the questions that I have for you, Mike. Is there anything I didn't ask that I should have? Anything we didn't cover here?
Perfect.
Like it. Easy to please. Thank you so much for your time, for your hospitality today. It's been a wonderful day here, and we really appreciate that. Thanks for sharing your stories with us, and we'll let you off the hook.